Hey Tara, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Introduce yourself to our readers and our listeners and explain what you and your practice do.
My name is Robert Selna. I'm an attorney based in Oakland, California. My background is in real estate transactions and land use and environmental issues. And about 5 years ago, in addition to my standard real estate clients, started to assist cannabis and hemp clients, primarily cannabis because of the legalization of commercial cannabis in California. I, until very recently, was at a long-standing firm in Oakland, and just in the last 2 months started a firm with my brother called Selna Partners, LLP. As I say, I have a background in real estate, cannabis, and hemp, and my brother is a litigator. We are just getting up and running and serving those three things primarily: real estate, cannabis and hemp, and litigation clients.
Can you explain some of the differences between hemp and cannabis?
There are a number of similarities and a number of differences. The biggest similarity is that both hemp and cannabis come from the same plant, the Cannabis sativa L plant. Really, the only difference between cannabis and hemp is that hemp has below 0.3% THC. And THC is the psychoactive element that is in the cannabis plant in different levels. But when you talk about cannabis as opposed to hemp, cannabis is what people used to call marijuana, which is not a technical term, but is cannabis with more than 3% THC. So hemp has trace amounts of THC in it. Cannabis has more and has psychoactive effects. So you can still have quote unquote cannabis, formerly marijuana, with pretty low levels of THC, but if it goes over 0.3%, the federal government considers that cannabis and marijuana, which is illegal under federal law, whereas now cannabis sativa L, which has below 0.3% THC, is legal under federal law following the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. And the biggest thing the 2018 Farm Bill did was to remove hemp from the Controlled Substances Act. The Controlled Substances Act added both marijuana and hemp together many years ago, and now hemp has been removed.
Can you go into how the 2018 Farm Bill affects state laws?
There's a number of ways in which the Farm Bill is reliant on states to govern and regulate their own hemp cultivation industries. This was a bit of a gradual rollout of federal legalization. Congress passed the 2014 Farm Bill, and that allowed states to do pilot programs and research programs for cultivating hemp. Congress passed the 2018 Farm Bill that removed hemp from the Controlled Substances Act, allowed for interstate shipment of hemp, but it put in the hands of the individual states the decision of whether they wanted to allow cultivation of hemp in their state. And I keep emphasizing cultivation because that's different than processing of hemp. It's different than adding hemp to food and beverages, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. So basically, it was just based on the cultivation. It was a farm bill. It was only related to cultivation. The 2018 Farm Bill says, yes, you can cultivate hemp if you decide to. You can opt out if you want, but you cannot stop the interstate commerce of hemp. And there's a couple ways you can opt in. One is to create your own hemp compliance plan, which describes to the federal government how you're going to identify locations where hemp is grown, how you're going to test for hemp, test for THC, so you're ensuring that you're growing hemp, and other things like what you're going to do if you have what's called a hot crop, which is one that has more than 0.3% THC, and how will that be disposed of. All those things need to be in a plan that is drafted and submitted to the federal government by a state that wants to govern its own hemp cultivation. The alternatives are to opt out, but you're not allowed to stop interstate commerce. You're not allowed to pull over trucks that are carrying hemp and seize the property. Even a state that doesn't allow its own cultivation must allow trucks to pass through who are delivering hemp. The problem with the Farm Bill for the state governments and the federal government was the Farm Bill said in states, if you want to allow cultivation, you have to come up with your compliance plan, and it has to be consistent with federal rules. The problem was a chicken and an egg problem because the federal government hadn't produced its own rules yet. And so it was asking states to comply with the federal rules without having provided its own rules. And so there was mass confusion about that. And most states stuck with the 2014 Farm Bill, which was pilot programs simply to do research on hemp cultivation, because through 2018, there was no federal guidance on what a state compliance plan had to look like. That changed in October 2019. The federal government issued something called the Federal Interim Rule, which provided the type of guidance for states that they needed to submit a compliance plan. So to take California for an example, California has decided to regulate its own hemp cultivation industry. So it passed legislation in order to draft a compliance plan. Now in the process of drafting a compliance plan, and that work based on the resolution is supposed to be done by the end of May. We'll see if that deadline is met. The federal interim rule from the federal government to provide guidance was issued at the end of October, and public comment was due on that by the end of December. And they got somewhere in the range, I think, of about 4,000 some comments. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has been working its way through those comments since then. If you break it down, the Farm Bill said, yes, you can regulate your own hemp cultivation, states, but you have to submit a plan to us. And before you can do that, we have to give our plan to you. The situation we're in now is that states are submitting compliance plans, or they're opting to stick with the 2014 Farm Bill, which is supposed to limit their cultivation to pilot projects and research projects. Some states have interpreted that to mean that they can do market research, meaning they can sell cultivated commercial hemp and do market research on it, which is kind of a sidestep to a requirement that it just be research pilot projects. Some states are opting out, and then others are just going to follow whatever was in the federal rules and not come up with their own. That's the place we are today.
What would you say that the Federal Drug Administration and the California Department of Public Health has in regards to regulations to CBD?
What the Farm Bill did was it explicitly left the use of CBD for food or beverages up to the Food and Drug Administration of the federal government. And then states have their own health departments that track the Food and Drug Administration with respect to food and beverages. And what the Farm Bill said was, hey, we're just talking about cultivation. If you want to introduce hemp-derived CBD to food and beverages, you have to follow the FDA. I don't know how much listeners know about CBD, but unlike THC, it is not the psychoactive element. It is the element that has health and wellness properties associated with it, like anti-inflammation, anti-anxiety, and other health and wellness properties. And CBD and THC somewhat work in conjunction with another in order to derive these benefits from them. So CBD is the health element to cannabis and hemp. There's a lot of interest from companies as well as consumers to have hemp-derived and cannabis-derived CBD in food and beverages, because it's an easier way to consume CBD than smoking it. And people have, for many, many decades, derived health benefits from CBD. There's a big industry push and a consumer push to have products that have CBD in them that are consumable. But the FDA has thrown a wet blanket on that idea, because the FDA has said you cannot add CBD to food or beverages. And the reason the FDA has taken that position is that the FDA named CBD as an active ingredient in an epilepsy drug called Epidiolex. And once the FDA identifies a compound as an active ingredient in a drug, by definition, the FDA prohibits that compound from being added to food or beverages. So the FDA has said, look, sorry, we have allowed CBD to be included in an epilepsy drug because it has been found to reduce the effects and the frequency of seizures. So you can, therefore, by definition, you cannot add it to food or beverages. So that's caused a lot of consternation and confusion among companies who want to produce those types of products and consumers who want them. Adding to the confusion is that the FDA does not regulate topicals like creams and sprays and things like that you put on your skin. It also does not regulate smokable CBD. So there's these products out there, and if you go to any grocery store, really, many pharmacies, many national chains, they'll have quote unquote CBD products, Most of those are topicals and not ingestibles at this point because they've gotten the message from the FDA that the consumables are not legal. But it's still confusing for consumers to see ointments and creams and things like that on the shelves that have CBD and not understand why they can't get a CBD cookie or a CBD juice or soda. So moving on from the FDA's position, there's been a lot of pushback. The industry has said, we need you to take a different position. This is a unique situation. We need more flexibility in your rules. Congress has asked the FDA specifically to look at making an exception for these kinds of projects. But so far, the FDA has stood by its position. Now, that's put it on states to decide what they will do, whether they will agree to comply with the FDA or because of the demand within their states, whether they'll make up their own rules. And so far, the California Department of Public Health has stuck with the FDA rules, meaning prohibiting the introduction of hemp-derived CBD or any CBD to food and beverages. Pause there for 1 minute in talking about California, because in California, CBD derived from marijuana, in other words, CBD that is combined with THC, food and beverages that are quote unquote cannabis, both THC and CBD products are legal in California under the cannabis regulations. Cannabis, in parentheses, marijuana regulations, meaning cannabis with more than 0.3% THC. Those products are legal in California. Under the state law, they would be absolutely illegal under federal law because they are not hemp products. Just to clarify, CBD from hemp that has less than 0.3% THC, and CBD can be derived from cannabis/marijuana that has, in addition to the CBD, more than 0.3% THC. What the CDPH, the Public Health Department, has said is, no, you can't add hemp-derived CBD to food and beverages. We're not going to allow it. The FDA doesn't allow it. We're not going to allow it. Meanwhile, the California state legislature, the representatives in the legislature have a lot of constituents who want hemp-derived CBD to be added to food and beverages and to be able to sell those and consume those on the open market. The state legislature introduced a bill last year that would allow CBD to be introduced to and added to food and beverages. It had widespread support last year. It was called AB 228 and got to a committee and stalled out and was never given a final vote and never went to the governor's desk. Behind the scenes explanation for that is that the governor's office was not all that well educated on the differences between hemp and CBD, didn't really know how well the laws would coincide. And there was concern from the cannabis/marijuana industry that hemp-derived CBD given a chance to unfairly compete against the marijuana CBD industry and wanted to be able to sell hemp-derived CBD in cannabis dispensaries regulated by the state, and there really weren't clear rules around that. Even though AB 228 had widespread support, it never made it to the governor's desk. There's been, and the chief sponsor of AB 228 is a state assemblywoman named Aguiar Curry. She brought back another version of AB 228 in January, and there was widespread belief that it was going to be approved by March. It hasn't been, and apparently some of the same questions are at issue. A principal one is whether a cannabis dispensary regulated by the state would be able to sell these products and other issues. So that's expected to be voted on by the end of the year. And if that passes, California, at least within the state's borders, companies will be able to add hemp-derived CBD to food and beverages. Now, Oregon already allows for that, and Colorado already allows for that. And some have said, aren't they violating federal law because the FDA prohibits it? And there's really two answers to that. One is the FDA rules say you can't add hemp-derived CBD to food or beverages and then introduce them into interstate commerce. And so some states have relied on that interstate commerce part of the FDA rules to say, well, we'll just keep it within our state borders, and therefore we won't be violating the law. The other is, in a place like California, the attitude is, look, we're already violating the federal law with our cannabis/marijuana regulations. It would be ironic and it would be inconsistent to then turn around and not allow hemp-derived CBD. We're already violating the federal law. What's the harm in taking this step? That's really the FDA and the California positions on CBD and food and beverages.
Despite the regulations on food and beverage, the growers are experiencing a lot of growth in that industry, correct?
There's been a tremendous amount of growth in the last couple of years, but you have to remember they're basically starting at zero. So it would make sense there'd be a lot of growth. I have some numbers that I have from an organization called CA Hemp, which is an advocacy organization, CA-Hemp, run by a guy named Brian Webster, who tracks the data from the California Department of Food and Agriculture really closely. The numbers are pretty dramatic. The number of registered hemp growers in California increased from 74 total in June 2019 to 558 as of February 2020. In less than a year, they went up by 480 growers, and the numbers I'm sure are increasing. And in addition, there are now more than 1,165 registered hemp cultivation sites in California and 38,400 acres associated with growers and seed breeders. If you're starting from zero, the numbers are going to get big pretty quickly, but because the California is such a massive agricultural state, there is a significant amount of interest from farmers in growing hemp, which doesn't require as much water as some crops and is considered environmentally more sustainable than some crops and can have more than one harvest a year. Interestingly, 99% of the hemp that's being grown today is being grown for CBD. When you think about it, legally, the only products that you can introduce hemp-derived CBD to are topicals and smokables. New markets need to be opened for hemp in order for all that hemp that's being grown to be used effectively. And other uses for hemp like building supplies, substitutes for concrete, textiles, all those things would be great ways to expand the uses of hemp and really a positive thing for California industrial markets and for the environment because hemp can take the place of plastics in many instances, serving as rope and fiber and other things. It has many uses, and in fact was one of the most prominent crops available for the first 100 years of the U.S.'s existence. But the hitch with using hemp-derived substances for other products is there's not a lot of good manufacturing facilities in the U.S. yet. And if you've made something illegal for the last 50 years, there's not going to be a lot of infrastructure available to process that product. And in order to use hemp for the types of things other than CBD that I've described, more manufacturing facilities are going to have to be built. And as far as I know, there are some investors and others working on getting those facilities built, but it'll take some time and it'll take some money.
Definitely be a big infrastructure investment to get all the equipment and everything.
Yeah, and I assume that's something your listeners would be interested in, given that you're West Coast Industrial Solutions. Infrastructure, manufacturing equipment, systems, logistics associated with getting hemp to market as a CBD product, but also as industrial products. It just needs to get ramped up. It needs to get up and running, and that's going to require some investment and some time. The coronavirus probably isn't helping move that ball forward as it might have been without the virus. So those efforts are being delayed like everything else is to some extent.
Do you have any perspective on the industrial side of hemp growing?
Industrial hemp, it's the same exact product. It's the same exact plant. It's just not grown specifically to maximize the amount of CBD in it. It still has to be below 0.3% THC to be legal. And there's, as I said, a very long list of things you can use hemp products for. Most common are rope and textile-like products, building supplies like hempcrete and substitutes for particle board. It's much more environmentally sound because they're not petroleum products like plastics are, and you don't have to cut down trees to make particle board with them. The hitch with industrial hemp products is what I described. You need manufacturing facilities that can do what's called decording the hemp, take the massive cords out of the hemp and be able to process the material so that it can be used for those types of products. And those manufacturing facilities exist in other countries where hemp was never criminalized, but they don't exist in the U.S. right now, except for in limited capacity or limited instances because we criminalized hemp. So it's going to take some time for the industry to get up and running.
Is there anything else you'd like to add or let our readers and listeners know?
Well, I would say if your listeners or readers are interested in the topic of legalization of hemp and hemp-derived CBD products, It's very much something that's in flux right now. Laws are being made, as I described. And if your readers or listeners have a position on this, for instance, if they're supportive of hemp-derived CBD food and beverages, the state legislature is working on this issue right now. And there's a real opportunity for people who have an opinion, industries that have an interest, others for whatever reason care about this topic, to have their voice heard in the state legislature. It's not something that has been well defined for a long time, and it's open to participation by the public and by the commercial sector. And so I would encourage folks who have a reason to be interested in this or are just interested in it for business reason or personal reasons to get involved and to reach out to their state legislators and to get their opinion heard about what the best way they think this is to regulate. Cannabis/marijuana has been that way for a few years, continues to be. There's a real opportunity for public participation, which is what our governmental structure calls for. Oftentimes, industries are so entrenched and they have such strong lobbying groups and such financial interests that there's not as much of an opportunity for individuals or groups to have their voice heard. But because of the infancy of this industry, there's a genuine opportunity for that. So I urge people to get involved. And there's organizations in California like CA Hemp and Vote Hemp and the California Hemp Council. You just do a web search and you'll find a lot of advocacy organizations to get involved in. And I would just genuinely encourage people, their efforts won't be wasted. They'll actually be able to participate in the process.
If they have any questions, how can they contact you?
The best way to contact me and my law firm, my phone number is 415-601-5385, 415-601-5385. I'll give you my direct email, robert@selnapartners.com. And Selna Partners is SELN as in Navy, selnapartners.com. Be happy to talk to anybody with follow-up questions on this topic.
Thank you for taking your time to talk with me today.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you.